Please join me in welcoming General Yi.
Yeah, well, thank you, General. And the first thing I noticed this morning was who came in through the door late. And in the front row, General Joe Brendler, good to see you this morning. Thanks for joining us, albeit late a bit. Now, for you all, 8 o'clock is normally maybe your regular time, but for a conference, 8 o'clock is considered to be early, so we understand a bit. But it's not your typical TechNet, so I was down at the bar last night. It was pretty quiet. If you're here in August for TechNet, Augusta, let me tell you what, that's a hopping place. But last night was pretty quiet, and so I did see Gerald Williams last night, and I do know that he didn't stay out too late, and so I thank you, Gerald, for making it this time. And you all know Gerald Williams? Raise your hand. Stand up, Gerald. So a few of you know Gerald Williams, retired Command Sergeant Major, NETCOM, and don't give him a hand. But I'll just say that maybe it was like, all right, give him a hand. Gerald showed up on time today. I'll say that. It was like 3 years ago down at TechNet Augusta. You know, we might have been up after 10 o'clock at night the night before. Maybe after 11. Maybe after 12. Maybe after 1. And I'm going around saying, hey, you guys going to show up to the 8 o'clock session in the morning? They said, yep, we'll be there. You know. And guess who was not in the audience 3 years ago? And I'll tell you the rest of the story, and I'll remind some of you about this story. So here's how it goes. You know, and you may recognize this little story here. So it's about the herd, the health of the herd, right? And in the wild, buffalo used to roam, you know, the plains. And when hunters would hunt, they'd shoot, they'd kill the weakest of the herd, right? Slowest, weakest, making the herd stronger and faster, right? That's the idea, right? And we were using this analogy to the network, where you take the weakness out of the network, the weak links, the weak switches, and the network's stronger and faster, right? Makes sense, right? So we talk about how this translates to human behavior, and how when you drink alcohol, alcohol kills the slowest and weakest cells, right? So naturally, when you drink beer, you feel smarter, right? And that was the old Budweiser joke, right? Well, so, you know, half an hour into the session, Gerald walks in. And then I said, and there's the smartest man in the room. He'd been up late killing slow brain cells. But anyway, hey, thank you, AFCEA International. Thank you, Chapter, for hosting this today. Great to be here. CERTS is a fantastic concept. I remember talking to Mike Warlick a couple years ago about this, so it's great to finally be part of this. Let me quickly introduce our panel and get this going. Ron Pontius, Deputy to the Commander of Army Cyber. You all know him. Give him a hand. Brigadier General Chris Eubank, Commandant of the Signal School, and in his off time, you know, in the warmer months, he's killing scorpions in his house. So, scorpion killer Chris Eubank, give him a hand. Colonel Paul Kraft, the Commandant of the Cyber School, and you all know Paul, because you can't help but to know Paul. The one and only Paul Kraft, give him a hand. And then late-breaking add-on, which we are so thankful to have to make this a joint event. And thanks to Ron for the contact. Colonel Derek Lane, the commander of the Communication Electronics School out at, is it 28 or 29 Palms?
It's 29.
29 Palms, California. Give me a hand. So, real quick story. In 2014, and there we were, right? And Chris was there too. We were in Nam together. And so in 2014, we were going back into Iraq for the first time since 2011. No kidding. And what do? There's no network, right? And so the first 10 people to go into Iraq, believe it or not, went in about a week before what they call the privileges and whatever, immunities was signed, which meant that the first 10 went in about a weekend without any, coverage. So if something bad were to happen, we didn't have a SOFA, we didn't have any, safeguards for them. 7 out of the 10 that went in were communicators. And that was to set up the network. If you can't talk, you can't execute, right? You can't fight. So we got them in, and the next batch went up. That was to Baghdad. The next step was to go to Erbil. And there's a, pretty smart general named Kurilla. He's up there saying, I need a DCAT. Now DCAT is deployable KU Earth Terminal. It's a big dish, big pipes, but he needed big bandwidth. And so we were able to scare up this DCAT into AOR and get it forward within a relatively short period of time. It was skid mounted, loaded on a plane, flew it up there, put it on the tarmac, and then it sat there for several months. It was because contractors were not allowed in the country yet. They couldn't get visas, right? And we did not have any military personnel that knew how to operate that doggone DCAT. We had a skills gap, right? Very easy to understand that skills gap. We have a skills gap across the spectrum in cyber, signal, you name it, information technology. We have a skills gap for the technology today. That was a very blatant reason. We have a technology gap or skills gap for the future as well. And the challenge for the future is we really don't know what some of those technologies are in the future. So we have to work hard today to best understand where technology is going so that we can position ourselves as a nation, as a DoD, to ensure that we're recruiting and retaining the skills and the personnel to enable the warfight. So with that in mind, I'll just, on the Army side here, our Chief of Staff at the Army says winning matters, but you can't win if you don't have the personnel and the skills and the resources to get after that. And that's why today's discussion is so important. I will share with you that DISA, our organization, we have hundreds of vacancies. Hundreds of vacancies. And every organization I know has vacancies, whether it be Army Cyber coming down this spring, the Cyber Center of Excellence, the DoD CIG6 where I came from. Everywhere I know, there's a shortage. And if you ask my boss, Vice Admiral Nancy Norton, what keeps her up at night, it's not that we're going to get breached, because we do. It's not that there aren't going to be bad things happen on the network, because they happen. It's personnel. It's that human capital. It's having the right people with the right skills to execute our mission. That's what she'll tell you. So with that, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of go down the line here. We're going to do some introductions and high-level overviews and maybe a joke. Maybe a joke, Chris? And then we'll go to questions so that we ensure that we do have that interaction with you all. So with that, over to Chris.
Thanks, sir. I don't think I have a joke. I'm just here to make General Yi look good.
That was a joke.
So thanks for everybody getting here early this morning. As General Yi pointed out, I am the Commandant of Signal School, the Chief of the branch, and also the Deputy Commanding General for the Cyber Center of Excellence for all things Signal. So what's CERT mean to me? So let's talk about the regiment. So the regiment is 59,000 soldiers. It is Compo 1, 2, and 3, second largest branch in the Army. And we train about 12,500 through Fort Gordon every year. So that's the branch in a nutshell. Where are we headed as a branch? So as a branch, there's 17 different military occupational skills within the Signal Corps. So we are very stovepiped right now. By 2023, that'll be 7. So where we're headed from a branch perspective is we're going to quit being stovepipes, so satellite operators don't just do satellites. So every soldier that comes to AIT now goes to what we call foundational training. We set foundations from an IP perspective, and then they go off to become specialized. But we have to, as a regiment, be a jack of all trades. We have to teach and train soldiers to solve IT problems every day. So that's kind of where we're headed from an enlisted perspective. Warrants. So our warrants are on the same path. So no kidding, Monday of this week, we started our first ever cybersecurity warrant officer basic course. So we had, for the last several years, been pulling them out of our existing warrant officer population and send them to the advanced course and then back out to the force. We are now, no kidding, assessing them off the street. So that's a good way ahead. We are now, from from a 255 Alpha perspective, so our information services warrant, we're changing their mindset as we speak. Got some guidance and direction from the G6 of the Army about 2 weeks ago to focus on data. And so those warrant officers we're going to start focusing on data for those warrant officers. From an officer perspective, the big thing we're changing there is we're changing from a BCT, so Brigade Combat Team centric mindset, to division, large-scale combat operations. So it's changing the way we do business. And our functional area, so our 26 Alphas and Bravos who do network architects and service architects, we're going to stand up a third one that will do data engineering. And then just from a training and education perspective, the way we're going to go about business in the future is we're going to bring these soldiers in. We're going to lengthen our foundational course to include basic theory and concept of radios and satellites and all things kind of cable installation. And then they will go off and they'll train together functionally. And then from there, they'll break off into their specialty and then all come back together to do an FTX field training exercise at the end. That field training exercise, the goal is that includes not just enlisted, but warrant officers and officers, and includes the other schoolhouse, the cyber schoolhouse as well, so that as a team, a cyberspace team, we're solving problems every day. How can academia and industry help me? Help me better understand how you're training your workforce so I can train my workforce. We do green boxes very well. We are now shifting from green box to theory and concept so that I can train cloud no matter what the vendor may be. So I'm interested in what you all do to train your workforce so I can train my workforce better for the 21st century. And hopefully share across the board. We've talked about it for a couple of days now. We're all drawing from the same talent pool. I want them first, and then I'll give them to you. But I want to get them into the force. I want to train them, and the ones we can retain, we want to retain. The ones we can't, we want to give to you to work inside your workforce, supporting us in the United States. So that's kind of where we're at as a branch, as a regiment, and I look forward to all your questions. Thanks.
All right, Colonel Lane.
So I'm here because I showed up, and I'm also here as a reminder to this Army-centric audience that as bad as it gets from resourcing and in strength, you could always be a Marine, where we always have it a little bit worse. So, no, I'm happy to be here. I came here for a couple of selfish reasons, and so maybe I can offer something back to the group through this panel. Just kind of give you a little scope of my schoolhouse. I'm probably peer to Joy Eubank as compared to for the Marine Corps. So McSess has a comm training battalion where we train all of our traditional signal Marines, our transmissions Marines, network data systems, and then we also have our basic comm officer course and our warrant officer courses, and each of the warrant officer courses have their different branches or different specialty branches. I also own the Air Control Training Squadron, so we have a very deliberate air control training, or air control, command and control apparatus. And so radarmen, radar mechanics, our tactical air support operators, which provide air control and aviation support to our infantry divisions. Our air defenders, Stinger gunners, fall under our air control training squadron. Then I also own the Marine Command at the Defense Language Institute, where all of our linguists go for language training, and then typically follow on training at Goodfellow for some SIGINT things. And then have an odd appendage. I own the Advanced Training Center for our EOD community. And so I'm at 29 Palms, so I live in your version of NTC. DLI's in Monterey, so I make as many command visits as I can up there just to enjoy the wine country and see some grass. So what are we doing? As you know, we got a new Commandant of the Marine Corps this summer, John Berger, and in his Commandant's planning guidance, he issued some very direct and essential tasks to our training and education command And part of that is to get after an information age model of learning. We're very industrial age based right now, right? We violated it here a number of days, but PowerPoint, knife hand, kind of walking the T, type of an industrial manner in which we teach these kids, and they don't learn that way in high school. We have a number of Marines that come through, obviously the officers have at least undergraduate degrees, but a number of our enlisted Marines come in with bachelor's and associate's degrees, and they don't learn the way that we teach them. And so we ran an OPT in August. I got there in June, late June, ran an OPT in August, and kind of tried to figure out what did the Commandant mean. And so I'm going to tell you what we're doing, and I'll give industry partners here maybe a challenge of how you can help me. So as we work this transition to an information age model of learning, we know that it requires some fiscal investment in our schoolhouse, and I'll talk about that at the end because I've got a pretty heavy-duty grassroots campaign to move my schoolhouse here to Fort Gordon and partner with the Army. We've got that model in a number of different places in the service, and it's one that works. So I'll talk about that brief at the end. So I'm living in 1950s Americana. I've got 2 power plugs in my office. I use that as an example. I'm a fire hazard just to power the things that I need to do my job on a daily basis. Well, you extrapolate that across my schoolhouse, I don't have, again, just fundamentally, I don't have the power plugs to provide the training aids that I need to enable me to achieve this information age model of learning. So we're getting after that locally, but it also requires a paradigm shift in the way we train the staff and civilian officers that come back to the schoolhouse to teach. And so we've taken advantage of a number of corporate partners who put on these innovative workshops, and we are changing the way we provide content and curriculum to our entry-level and career and intermediate level Marines. They come back to the schoolhouse for chief's courses and other follow-on training. And as best we can, we're modernizing the facilities we have, being careful that I don't want to put too much of a fiscal investment and make the Marine Corps fall in love with 29 Palms again and not move me. And then we're shifting our programs of instruction, or POI, from locally hosted, kind of PowerPoint, PDF-driven, to cloud-based. And for me, a cloud is obviously, it's a relative term. For me, I'm putting it in a couple of different opportunities the Marine Corps provides me, so I'm not hosting it locally. And then we're giving a lot of our entry-level Marines some self-paced opportunities. And so similar to what they do here at the Signal School, every Marine goes through BCC, Basic Comm course. And so we kind of level the bubbles, and they break off in their different MOS tracks. And I tell the Marines, 29 Palms is not an envious place to be. If you want to get out of here, self-pace yourself out of here. And we're seeing Marines do that, right? And so I have to have the information technology, right, or the backbone to support that on a larger scale. And so as some of these pilots that we've worked with, some of these self-paced opportunities bear fruit, we're reinforcing those efforts as best we can. So I'll kind of close with the OPT that I talked about. And part of that yielded the idea to lift and shift the schoolhouse down here at Fort Gordon. And so worked with General Eubank previously, so it was easy for me to get down here and kind of get in his hip pocket. And we kind of war gamed it out a couple of months ago, produced a couple of briefing slides, and I think it's at least getting traction in the Marine Corps as a potentially viable opportunity. So as we work that's kind of my big rock. But in the interim, my challenge to the industry here would be I am challenged in modernizing my curriculum and my POI. As I talk to these young kids, I've got this golf cart my sergeant major and I ride around on, and see pockets of Marines moving from the barracks to the classrooms, and I'll just stop them in the middle of the street because I own about 4 blocks of 29 Palms. So if I stop traffic, it's my part of the base and it's okay. And I ask them, what do you think about the way we provide instruction to you? And with the exception of the ones that are in some of our self-paced pilots, the feedback is they don't really like it, right? Because they're used to a cart full of iPads or tablets rolling into their high school classroom. They're used to kind of doing some things on their own. And so we're learning from our students. We're changing the way we arrange our classrooms. We're making the students the center of the classroom. The instructor now is more of an enabler. And we find that a lot of these kids have an ability to, quite frankly, teach their little pod or cohort through some of our POIs and reinforced by the instructors. And so my ask would be, if you have professional curriculum developers, I'd love to talk to you because, we're trying to gamify our POI, and because people do, you get a little badge, a little coin, whatever. I don't know, clickbait. People like it. It's just a reality. So, but to take a PowerPoint-driven lecture method kind of POI and turn that into something modern is a challenge for some of my, uniformed Marines, because they just don't do that. So, with that, I'll pause and just thank you for the opportunity.
Thanks, Colonel Lane. All right, now to the Commandant of the Cyber School.
I'll talk slowly. No. So first, thanks AFCEA for having us. I really appreciate this first class event. But I just want to talk a little bit about what we are doing in the cyber school. So I'll tell you, just as I'll say an Army officer who's been raised on PowerPoint and on the rote lecture and how things are, I was amazed. I was a little bit uncomfortable when I walked into the cyber school and walked into classrooms and talked to students, and there's no PowerPoint. That's not how we're doing it. We are very much in an informational age. What I saw on the board, was whiteboard with a lot of, which may be warm inside, a whiteboard with a lot of scribbles on it, and big screens up there with code, where people were actually learning how to and working through code and talking about real-world scenarios and real-world problems and powering through them as a group. Not necessarily even instructor-led. Sometimes the students were really learning and churning around that problem, and then the instructor was facilitating, but it was a radical change. And so that was I've learned to be uncomfortable and understand what's going on in the way we train and educate now, but that's just a precursor to what I want to talk about. But we would not be where we are in this school, new school, not tens of thousands in our force, thousands in our force. And so a reason why we can be agile and nimble and how we're radically changed in an information age is sometimes because of our size. And so I'll talk a little bit about that. So first, how do we even get them in? Let's talk about recruiting. I know we've had some panels on recruiting, but I just like to talk about what the Cyber Corps is doing in terms of recruiting. So believe it or not, and this is another change of not how we do it for the infantry and the armor and the engineers, just for Army in general, we actually start recruiting in high schools. We actually start recruiting freshmen in college. So over the last year, I started trying to do up some stats, visiting 23 universities, going out to the ROTC advanced camps, going out to high schools, going to capture the flags and DEF CONs, going out to industry and asking people to join the force. That was a big thing. So we went to 23 universities and colleges last year, multiple high schools, multiple events, and recruiting those folks. And the things we have to tell our future warfighters is, if you want to be in this space, we are really expecting you to have that STEM degree. So truth be told, I would have not been a cyber officer as a second lieutenant, not with an American political science degree. But that's not all. We're also looking for people who have aptitude and attitude and passion for what they want to do. We also test them for grit. Do you have the resilience to be in this space? And certainly we want to make sure that they have the ethics to be able to handle this because of what we're doing in this space. And that's an important criteria, and we have a battery of tests as we bring them into the forces. We want to make sure we're bringing in the right warriors inside this space in order to be educated and trained and then be passed over to Army, primarily to Army Cyber Command. It's also about getting your clearance and being physically fit, and so there's other pieces and parts with that. So we bring people in right out of high school, and they become soldiers. ROTC program, we've doubled the number of West Point graduates this particular year, and we have a special onboarding program called, we talked about it, I believe, once already on a panel, the Direct Commissioning Program. And that's where you can be directly commissioned from second lieutenant to colonel, And what we're looking for is Army Cyber will say, I need a special skill. And then we go out and we find those folks, and we board and we panel, and we go through that same process of the ethical checks and can you code and in-person interviews and all those other things. And they've got to go through the medical processes, and then they can become, again, a lieutenant through a colonel. That is a radical change in how the Army does business. We picked that model very similar to what we did, we pick up doctors and lawyers. And because we're looking for people with industry skills. So that's certainly a space where if you're in industry and you've got some experience and you're looking for someone who we could create some cross-pollination within our forces, it's a great way for industry or academia to help us in that particular space. As I talked earlier, our training methodology is also radically different than what I was used to, going up and going to all these different courses, military courses. It is very much virtualized. It is problem-based. Many times it's scenario-based. Back to what folks are used to, like we'll run even Star Wars scenarios, believe it or not, with gaming type of thing, and students can get into it because they can see what's next and what's the problem and what do I have to deal with, and the students are absolutely powering through courses like that. And then we bring them into a classified environment and say, and this is what it looks like when we're doing it for real, and it's not just this storyboard scenario. This is what everything you just learned. Then we flipped it over, and this is what it means when we're talking about fighting one of our nation states, our peer nation states in this space. And the people that we bring in, it's not just taught by the cyber school professionals. It's also we bring in adjunct faculty in, so people that are in the fight now, and they come in and they teach the entire course or portions of the course too. So we're bringing warfighters from the fight. They're teaching the course, potentially, hey, this is what we just did in the fight, last week. I want you to understand where we are, and it gives them relevant context of how we're doing business. And because we're doing this as how we develop our courseware as really as software, we're able to update our courseware. I know the TRADOC model is 3-year cycle. We're able to update that every day. And so we radically changed how fast we can update our curriculum. So I know we're not really doing that necessarily even in academia in the colleges, but we're able to modify our courseware just the next day to be able to teach or modify a course based on currently how things are happening, because technology is constantly changing, our threats constantly changing, and so we are changing how we even train and educate before we put them out to the force. So this is much, much different than what I would have expected. So I just want to point those two, and I've got obviously a lot more, but I'll collapse it down to, and it's really been about partnering. So partnering with Army Cyber, partnering with industry, partnering with the local universities and regional universities, partnering with the Signal School, because a lot of the courses that our cyber warriors take are actually taught and trained inside the Signal School, and so we actually send our students over there to take the class, and they come back for other portions of class because it's all about the network, right? The basis of cyber is the network, and so we go through and we take networking courses, and then we come back and say, how can we fight off those or fight within those environments? So that's key. Also, with DDS, Cyber Command going forward. So that's a big part of that is partnerships. And I will tell you that we will become stronger with additional partnerships going forward, or other suggestions on what we can train on, or other universities that we could go to, or other industries or corporations that we should talk to. So thank you all, and I look forward to your questions.
Thanks, Paul.
And so now from the operational perspective, because this really is, as you talk about the school commandants that are heavily focused on the training, but as Paul talked about, also part of, in many aspects, the recruiting and training. So I'm gonna focus a lot about the employment and retention, but I do want to say on the civilians, which is a big part of for sure, on our DODN operations, but even on our cyber mission force, 20% of the teams are civilians, and they're doing the exact same work roles, and I'll talk more about that. So when you look about Army Cyber Command, and again, people a lot of times think about the cyber mission force, but the operate and defend the Army portion of the DODN, that is job one for Army Cyber Command. And what you may not realize, 7 of the 9 active duty signal brigades are part of Army Cyber Command. And so that is the big mission, and we are doing everything we can to further empower and enhance NETCOM to be the Army DODN Operations Command. And that is that's how we're moving, but it's really critical what that workforce is. So I want to talk, we've really embraced, the Army has published a really called a people strategy, a talent management, and it really is, the Army is about, and the strategy is acquire, develop, employ, and retain, right? Similar verbs that AFCEA is talking here, but that's what the Army is about. So when you think about that acquire and train piece, on the civilian piece, I just want to highlight where not accepting things as they are, as you heard Colonel Kraft talk about, completely new way of how they do teaching. It really is about learning, right? And that's the focus, and really about outcomes. So I'll use an example on the civilians with NETCOM. NETCOM is about 5,000 civilians worldwide, and typically loses about 10% a year, about 500, because it's an older workforce. Mostly that's retirement, a few deaths also, but mostly it's retirement. Lose because the average age of the workforce was about 54 years old. It's an older workforce. In FY18, General Baker and I said and they were struggling to find talent. And remember, it's worldwide. It's across CONUS, but can you get the right talent going to Fort Polk or Fort Riley, whatever that is, let alone Korea, Kuwait, those sort of things. So we stepped back and said, everything's on the table, let's completely look at it. NETCOM was supported by 59 CPACs, the personnel centers across the Army. We partnered with the Civilian Human Resources Agency, CHARA, and we agreed to do a consolidated single CPAC, and we hired a recruiting firm to help us find talent. And within 10 months, we hired 1,200 people, mostly 2210s. But we did it because we absolutely changed the model and said, what's the single metric we're geared on? Onboard strength of qualified people. That's the driving metric we drove on. And so we went from 82%, which is where NETCOM typically was on board. Within 10 months, we hit just short of 100%. Of course, you're only funded at 95% of your civ pay, so you got to be careful not over strength. But we have maintained that, and we did that in 10 months. And I just want to use that as an example. How did we do it? It was about reaching out, expanding the pool of candidates, right? Because typically with all the CPACs, USA Jobs announcements, et cetera. But we worked through with doing the recruiting firm finding things. Now, we had some cultural things we had to deal with. Hiring managers were not comfortable making a selection off of a single resume. Where's my USA Jobs? Where's my qualified list? No, we hired a recruiting firm to help identify. And we particularly were focusing on young men and women just coming out of college. Who is more likely to go overseas, right? They don't have families yet or kids yet. They'd be happy to go do a 3-year tour in Korea or something, right? And so we really worked that. Then the next step was the hiring manager said, not qualified, no prior government experience, okay? So we had to work through those cultural things, but now, we hit that 10 months about halfway through FY19. Now the feedback from the managers are, hey, this is really great, this young men and women. So we expanded our pool of candidates, okay? I just want to use that as an example of how you really say, how do I get to the outcomes, not accepting how things they are, okay? So the other things I want to highlight, we've also established what we call SEED, the Career Exploration Advancement and Development Program. This is our internship, again, reaching to the left, where we're offering 8 to 10 week summer internships for students and 2-year fellowships for recent graduates. So we're building that pipeline where we can really target getting those new young men and women into our workforce. We may not keep them forever because today's younger is a different attitude about staying place along, but get them in, and we're seeing a lot of real success on that. Also, if you were here in August TechNet, you saw us stand up the new career program for cyberspace effects, and that is, again, for the civilians on the Cyber Mission Force teams, Career Program 71, and again, that's the civilian equivalent of the Branch 17 cyber officers, warrant officers, and enlisted, right? So that's where we're focused on the specialty training. As we look towards the employment and retention, talent management is a big deal to our command. And in fact, Colonel Dave Branch is here in the audience, a former brigade commander. This is his focus about across the command. How do we really, again, working that acquire, develop, employ, and retain, but particularly on the employ and retain, how are we really understanding what the workforce wants? How do we really, not say, well, it's 3 years, you're going to move whether you want to or not. How do we, because in this area, particularly on the cyber operations, they're mostly at Fort Meade, Fort Gordon, to a smaller extent, Joint Base San Antonio and Hawaii, but that's where the bulk of the force is for now. And so how do we really cater to keeping that workforce? We are working through things also about how do you manage on the military side. We've now created a tool developer, more technical, working with Colonel Kraft and his team of what they're doing in the schoolhouse, so someone can be an absolutely dedicated tool developer and do those opposed to being a mission commander. And the other thing is moving to retention. What we've particularly focused on is, we truly can't compete completely on compensation, but as we look at about the mission and what they're doing, but we have to do better. In FY18, the Army allowed us to start what we call assignment incentive pay, where we targeted our three most critical work roles. And that initially started at the basic, senior, and master at 200, 300, and 500. As we did the data in FY19, the Army allowed us to expand it to these numbers as you see in this Tier 1. This is per month if you're qualified against the joint qualification records. And then in FY20, we further expanded it. We've now established these 4 tiers. Again, the Tier 1 is your interactive online operator, your exploitation analyst, and your tool developer. The Tier 2 is the focus on defensive cyberspace operations. Tier 3 is the other roles in the cyber mission force, and then Tier 4 is the support. And so we have absolutely, based on our data, based on retention, it's about compensating. But you also see in the bottom left there what we're doing about re-enlistment bonuses, and an area in the bottom right, the warrant officer retention bonus. We were losing a critical part of our workforce, CW3s and CW4s. So we got the Army to approve this retention bonus. Again, they sign up to stay 4 more years, and we'll pay them $20,000 a year up to $80,000 to keep warrant officers. And this has been absolutely critical, because in this mission space, we spend so long, again, on the cyber mission, we spend so long training, we absolutely need to retain the best talent. We've done some workforce study, and what we get back, if you think about those word kind of pictures, the feedback we got, the workforce is excited about the mission, time is best utilized doing the mission, and job-specific training is desired, and as we work our way through it. And I'll hold there because I want to get down to really have the audience questions, so thank you.
All right, so we have technology for questions, right? So looking back to the back of the room, what questions do we have for the panel?
We have a bunch, sir.
All right, here we go. All right, oh my goodness. I'll read it. Wow. Retention incentive use is currently limited, with the exceptions, to those civilians leaving federal service. As we continue to struggle with filling cyber positions within the CMF, has any consideration been given to rethink our ability to use retention incentives to keep highly trained and qualified cyber operators within the CMF?
Yeah, so I'll take that one. So we are absolutely right now working through, can we do the same similar things we talked about based on the JQR and work role, that Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3, Tier 4, for civilians? Because civilians on the cyber mission force, they're doing the same work roles as the military. We are working our way through that. absolutely, I believe we will get there over, hopefully in FY20. It is a matter of applying resources to it, but absolutely that's the direction we're moving.
Good to hear. All right, next question. How is the U.S. Army and Cybercom utilizing the NICE framework to facilitate gearing training to specific roles and tasks? Who wants to take that one? Paul?
I'll take it. Yeah. I'll say the basis for what we did was the NICE framework, and then it was really then subdivided down to what does that look like for the military, and then down to Cyber Command saying these are the official work roles, and then we actually have a joint training requirements for those specific work roles, and those joint training requirements in some cases are either trained inside the operational force or inside, I'll say, training education inside TRADOC, Training and Doctrine Command, where we'll train some specific or support some specific training work roles. But it absolutely starts with that overarching, I'll say, NICE framework.
Okay. All right. Next question. Let's just do this one. The cyber warrior's brain is the cyber warrior's brain is the infantryman's muscles. Do you intend to link the physical rating requirements with the PT requirements? Who wants to dive on that grenade?
So you may have heard about the new ACFT, and there are categories, black, silver, and gold, within those spaces. And so black is the highest rating. So you've got to get a certain number of, score on certain number of events, certain number of, you have to score a certain amount, a little less, and then a little less. And then the Army writ large decided what MOSs, what military occupational skills have to be at what level. And so I'll just say on the cyber side, and I'll pass it over to my brother here. On the cyber side, we got the gold, which is, well, I'll say is the lowest of the three standards, but it's based on what we are physically expected to do, based on what we're doing. I'll say more than likely inside of a facility going forward. Okay, so that is where it is today. But as cyber expands from working at the strategic side and pushes into the tactical side, that physical requirement rating may change. And I'll pass it over to John Eubank on his side.
Yeah, so the thing to remember is that the ACFT, the assignment of MOSs to bands, gold, silver, or black, was based on OPAT, Occupational Physical Assessment Test, right? So what does that MOS have to do physically for their job? And I would tell you from a signal perspective, we're now going back and looking at our OPAT because little known fact for the signal regiment is 60% of us don't work in signal formations. We work in infantry, armor, artillery, soft formations. And so right now we're the gold standard, and as the chief of the branch, what I would tell you is we need to be at least a silver standard. So we're going back and looking at our OPAT to see if we've got that right so that we can then change what we do from an ACFT perspective. Mm-hmm. Bottom line up front is if you join the Army, you're going to do physical training. It doesn't matter what MOS you are. If you're a cyber warrior, a signal soldier, EW, IO, you're going to take an APFT up till October, and then starting in October, the new test will be the Army Combat Fitness Test, age, gender neutral.
Let me see if Colonel Lane has something to add to that, because the Marines got an idea about physical fitness
absolutely.
as well.
We've got one PFT and one COT. We take one the first half of the year, the other the second half of the year. There's a service standard. Everybody has to meet it. But to General Eubank's point, I was going to bring up, we created the MIG, the MEF Information Group, and that's kind of where we focus our tactical operations in the information environment, information-related capabilities, all that, in that one organization. And for us, our service level concept is Expeditionary Advanced Base Operations, right? We're focused on some of the island chains in the Pacific, and the Marines have to be physically fit because one or two dudes or dudettes will be the only cybercom capability for some of these, I think, new formations you'll likely see come out of some of the Commandant's planning guidance for the next few months. But at the end of the day, you got to be able to tote a rifle, and you got to be able to tote your SL3 weapon for us now is a laptop. But so now you got to carry both.
All right, thanks, Colonel Lane. Hey, this might be a quick one for Ron. Is there a direct hire for government civilian training positions?
Yes, and you may have heard me mention yesterday, over the last 2 years, we have used direct hire authority in a little over 1,500 hiring actions, where we have identified people that have the skill sets needed, and we've done that. I also want to highlight that in the cyber area, not so much yet in the Signal, although General Eubanks can add more to this, we are now starting to build class seats, the trade-off process, a trap for civilians, because they're doing the exact same work roles, and we want to have them have the same training experience. So in FY21, the civilians will be just right alongside the military in the cyber. I think it's on a space available basis on the Signal side, but Chris, you want to take that there?
Yes, sir. We're doing it already. So if Civilian 2210 wants to come to BOLIC or the Captain's Career Course or a portion of those or to a functional course, all they have to do is request a seat. And if we have space available, they'll be authorized to sit in that class. But their boss has to gotta let them go, right? But they are authorized to come sit in those courses as seats are available today, so that they understand exactly what the military side of the Signal Regiment is doing every day that they're sitting in a network enterprise center supporting the uniform side of the house. So
That makes a ton of sense. I've always felt that, by the time you spend 10 years in uniform, you've gone through so many schools. By the time you spend 10 years as a civilian, you might be eligible to start going to some supervisory, training. And that trend is changing, hopefully, and I'm glad to hear.
And Garrett, let me just add, in this space, and we started it with the cyberspace operations, but I absolutely believe it on the Signal side too. Technology is evolving so quickly, and the threat is evolving. You have to have a dedication to continuing education and training. Okay, that is just the fundamental in this mission area. You have to be dedicated, and you have to look for how do we enable the workforce. Even if they're 100% trained today, talk about a civilian, in a few years, if you haven't gone to continuing education and training, they're falling behind. You have to. And that's why this CERTS and what AFCEA is doing is so critical, and why it's such a tremendous partnership.
Agreed. All right, so here's a tough one. What did Brigadier General Eubank mean by green boxes in training?
So good, bad, or indifferent, inside the regiment, we still have to train green boxes, so radios, right? So whether it's a handheld, a man pack, it's a transit case, it can be painted green, tan, black, but we still have to do that. So we're in a position inside the regiment where we are teaching buttonology, but we're trying to teach theory and concept, because, as Mr. Pontius said, the technology is changing so fast that the radios are now changing so fast. And we are in the process and are doing a very good job now inside of our acquisition processes of speeding delivery up. So General Gallagher and the network CFT, they plan on dropping new kit every 2 years. So I have got to get away from specific vendor boxes and move to theory and concept. So when a soldier leaves the schoolhouse, it doesn't matter what the box is or says. If they function theoretically, conceptually the same way, then we're in a good place. I hope that answers your question.
Did that answer the question? There's a hand up in the audience. Was that a yes? Oh, well, go ahead. Go ahead and ask a question. All right, go ahead.
Colonel Steve Dawson, I'm the former assistant commandant at the service school, so I know when we need it, the minute we need it. Show up at Fort Gordon, maybe partner with the 782nd, crash no problem, because we're in the heat of battle, solve the problem, go up to the school, and then leave.
So there wasn't a question, but thank you for sharing. All right, so we do have just a few minutes left, and we're going to wrap this up. We have a bunch of questions here, but some of these gentlemen will be able to stay after to answer your questions. And so we'll just go down the row. Hey, what's the key takeaway that you want the audience to walk away with from you, Chris?
So we're not doing it alone. We need your help. And like I said, we're all looking at the same talent. I just want them first, and then I will give them up. We're dealing with a different generation now. I would tell you they want to serve. I'm not sure they want to serve for 20 years, but they do want to serve. And so we've got to figure out how we get them in to serve and then get them back out to you to continue to support what we're doing here as a nation.
Thanks, Chris. My takeaway is he wants them first. He'll give them back to you once he's done. Thanks, Chris. Colonel Lane.
So again, if you do curriculum development, come see me after this. But just on the retention side real quick, I think there's something, at least for Marines, our Marine communicators and cyber operators, they want to fight the domain, right? And so retaining Marines sometimes is just as simple as putting them in an organization that has the authorities to allow them to take full and complete advantage of the skills that they've garnered over their, however long they've been in the Marine Corps. So that's certainly an incentive for a Marine who just wants to get into the fight in any way that he or she can. Appreciate the opportunity to speak. Have a great day.
Thanks for joining us. Paul.
Just two things. One, if you have or know someone who has, you believe, the right skills, aptitudes, attitudes, passion, grit to be a cyber warrior, please shoot me a note. That's thing one, because it really is about relationships. We don't know what we don't know, and you collectively know a lot more people than me individually. So that's one. And then two, we are constantly looking for better and faster ways to train. We are certainly using, one of the questions was kind of game theory. That has been the best way we have seen to train scenario-based, force on force. This side of the room is blue team, this side of the team is the red team, and we're fighting over this. Go. Everyone is motivated to try to figure that out because that's the problem, not to lose. And that is exactly where we are really in our Army, and where we are in this space of information warfare, cyber warfare, is not to lose. It is, from a defensive perspective, I think it was Sun Tzu quote was, and I'll mangle it, but invincibility lies in the defense. So as a cyber warrior, I'm absolutely relying on the Signal Corps to establish the network and secure the network and defend the network, and also pass it over from a defense perspective. Is we can't lose the castle. We can't lose the data. And so the best way that you all have to do that, we're looking for that. But that's part one of his saying. Second half is, invincibility is in the defense, but victory is in the offense. And it's also, we've got to make sure that we have the ability to win in this space, not just not lose. And that really comes down to what can we learn in industry and how can we do it better, have better systems, have better processes going forward. And so I look for your partnership now and going forward.
So my takeaway from Paul is throw it out there that if you know someone that might be able to meet the challenge, to make it so hard that they want to do it, right? Cool. Make it like, oh, you can't do this, and they want to do it. And my other takeaway was the philosophy lesson. Thanks, Paul. Appreciate that. All right. Ron.
People are the most important. It's absolutely our number one, I won't say issue, it's our number one aspect of what we do, right? And it is, I said earlier, it's about how do you really do the acquire, train, employ, and retain, and continuous dedication to education and training. We are also working hard to really think about diversity, and I mean more than just gender and race. Background, experience, thought process, thinking. There were some comments yesterday about, there's a place for artistic ability and everything else in this thing because the problems we deal with. And finally, not everybody in this workspace is the same critical, and we must prioritize how we incentivize the more critical work roles and more critical skill sets because it makes a difference when you really talk about those very high-end operators. Someone is worth, their value they bring is worth 10, 50, 100 of others, right? And those are those very small numbers that was mentioned a couple times yesterday. Those individuals, particularly the ones that we have to do everything we can to find, train, and retain. And that's all.
Thanks, Ron. And you just couldn't get all your questions in, obviously, but hopefully we'll hang around a little bit to answer your questions. I want to thank the panel, thank the audience, and I got a little special something for the panel members here today. So let's give them a hand while I give them a little something here.
Thank you, General Yee. Just for the record, the audience had over 25 excellent questions.